I've lurked here a long time and never thought of something I could post, but remembered this gem from about 14 years ago. This starts when my, now, wife and I decided to move in together and rent a house. We were in our early 20s. It was our first time renting, and we had fairly low income, so our options were limited. Luckily, we found a place that was in a less desirable area, but had recently had some basic renovations. We signed a lease and life went on. Our first 12 months went by with a rental inspection from the agent every 3 months or so, never got any feedback, and being new to renting figured everything was okay. We had a couple items that needed repairing in that time, so I met the landlord and got his details for organizing repairs. He seemed like a decent bloke, probably early 40s, reasonably handy, and did some repairs himself. The first year went by. The lease came to an end. They increased the price, and we signed on for another 12 months. Then it happened. About 2 months later, the agent came to inspect along with the landlord's wife. The wife turned her nose up at absolutely everything and made a number of insulting comments about our furniture when she thought I couldn't hear. We got an inspection report after that, gave us a huge list of items to rectify and 2 weeks to do it, or they'd initiate proceedings to evict us. Naturally, after never hearing any feedback from any other inspections, we were shocked. The items were mostly minor nitpicks, with the worst things being to move our cats outdoors, clean the oven, and poison weeds on the path in the backyard. We were fine copping it on the chin and doing what they asked, except for the cats. Initially, when signing the lease, it said no pets, but we requested and got acceptance for our indoor-only cats. It was noted on the lease, but not on the copy I had. I was kicking myself for not having it in writing and knew I had no chance if they wanted to push the point, so I called the landlord rather than talking through the agent. He explained that tenants in the other house they owned had been using it as a drug lab and the agents had never picked up on it. So when they found out his wife insisted on going along to our inspection, hence why we got a bad report. I talked it out with him, and although he was very patronizing toward me, he agreed we could keep the cats inside as long as we kept everything clean and the next reports went fine. So we did as they asked, and they increased the inspections from once every 3 months to once a month, which is the minimum period they're allowed. We had a list of things to fix after every inspection. It made our life hell. We felt like intruders in our own home. We grew to hate living there, and it put a strain on our relationship. Luckily, or unluckily, depending on how you look at it, my father passed away around that time, so I ended up with inheritance money from his super fund and the sale of his house. My wife and I used the inheritance as a deposit to buy a house of our own, sorted out a loan agreement, and found a place we like. Now, this is where I finally got my chance to repay them for making us feel like indentured servants that only existed to vacuum carpets and scrub walls in our home. By some miracle of luck, I negotiated the settlement date for our new house to be 1 week before our lease was due to end. This meant that we wouldn't have to break contract and be stuck footing the bill while they found new tenants. Better yet, they sent me a letter saying our lease was due to end and included a new lease agreement with a large jump in rent. The letter said we had to either sign the new lease and send it back to them by a date that was 2 weeks before end of lease, or consider the contract ended, move out by the end of the lease term, and hand over the keys. It said nothing about telling them we didn't want to renew the lease, so I didn't. I didn't want them booking open inspections and intrude further on our lives to show the place to new tenants, and decided they didn't deserve extra notice. The days ticked by. A couple weeks went past, and my wife and I were busy getting ready to move. I didn't get contacted by the agent again until my phone rang 1 week after the new paperwork was due, literally the day before we were moving out. It was the agent, of course. They greeted me nicely and said it was just a reminder that we needed to sign the new lease and get it back to them. I told them, "Oh, we aren't signing it. We bought a house and we're moving out tomorrow." The other end of the line went dead silent for a good few seconds, while my face got stuck in a grin. The agent quietly asked why we hadn't told them, and I said the paperwork only said to let them know if we were extending the lease. Nothing about moving out, so I assumed they knew. She said goodbye pretty quickly, and the panic in her voice was glorious. She was screwed and knew it. I wish I got to hear more of the fallout, but my wife and I moved out, cleaned the house over the remaining week, and I handed the keys over. They never booked any open inspections in that final week, so the house sat empty for a while waiting on new tenants, and the landlords missed out on some rent payments. We also checked the listings and saw they advertised it at a lower price than what they were going to gouge us for. As a bonus, a couple days after the lease ended, the agent called me and said our contact stated we had to have the carpets steam cleaned and they were going to take the cost from our bond. I told her we'd had them steam cleaned, and she said we didn't. The carpets smelled like garbage. After me telling her again that we had, she demanded a copy of the receipt. I emailed it through and never heard from them again. I didn't mention that there was a cavity under the house and the couple bags of rubbish I chucked under there as we were moving out because the bins were full. I guess the floor wasn't airtight. A long time ago, in a state far, far away, a college town in a Midwestern state in the early 80s, our little pizza shop had a big problem with a couple of frat houses. Actually, a lot of the pizza and delivery places had problems with the frat houses that was in all likelihood a big problem with a few bad apples, but there were a couple of houses that seemed to have an even higher jerk quotient. The issue for us was related to our 30 minutes or free policy, long since discontinued, and the thought that with some trickery and lying you might be able to get a pizza without handing over any cash. Since we were anal about times and did, in fact, give away pizza when it was late, the occasional witty people that tried to get a free pizza without having it be late got exactly what was coming to them, usually a visit from the cops if they got too out of hand. A stern rebuke from a manager was usually enough, though. But one house in particular seemed to have quite a few bad orders. Sometimes I would come into work and there would be a note by the phone for this particular house. The note would say something like, "We are no longer taking orders from anyone in the X-Frat." On a really rare occasion, "Tonight, we're not taking orders from any frat." Yeah, they were that problematic. One night in particular, one of our drivers comes back from this X-Frat, not just with the unpurchased pizza, but with pee all over him. Seems he got to the house on time, and rather than go through the usual "I'm a real jerk and want to challenge your time," even though it's been like 10 minutes, they simply refused to open the door. It was a 2-story house, and this guy was persistent. When he went to a side door, they opened a window above him and dumped it on him. Making things worse, this driver was a hard-working, redneck-looking kind of guy. Everyone in the shop loved working with him. He had a great attitude and was the kind of person who'd be there for you if you needed him. Dumping pee on him was the last straw. So the manager calls the cops and they drive over to the ex-frat house and the stage is set. The door is answered by a lone ex-member who comes across as just your honest, hardworking college guy who's really sorry for the confusion. The cop inquires if he's aware that someone dumped pee on the driver, and this guy conveys that yes, he's aware and they're all really sorry. They didn't mean to do it. It was a college prank gone bad. Ah, shucks kind of manner. The cop then tells him which person here did it. He screws around a bit, but finally confesses that, in fact, it was him, the poor, hard-working college guy that did it, and he's really, really sorry. So my manager looks at the cop and more or less conveys that it's time to throw the book at Mr. Aw Shucks. They slap the cuffs on him, and to his frat mates' dismay, he's tucked into a squad car and everyone heads down to the local police station for a booking that will involve a weekend in jail, or someone bailing this guy out. It's not going to be something a simple apology solved. They're taking this guy's confession when a carload of ex-frat guys arrives at the station, asking to see the cop that's doing the intake paperwork. My manager is still there with the driver, and this is where the revenge portion really kicks in. This wasn't even planned, and I can only imagine that the cops were really sick of the ex-frat nonsense because what happens next would have been awesome to catch on cell phone video. Believe it or not, there was a time when such things were not commonplace. Two of the arriving ex-party are having a rare moment of guilty conscience and proceed to confess to the officer that it's not Mr. Awshucks who dumped the pee, but in fact it was them. The cop proceeds to take their confession down, verifies on all ends that, yes, in fact, it was these two clowns and not Awshucks who dumped the pee. Everyone is in agreement, so they book the two guys and put them in jail. By this time, it's well past midnight. Then, Mr. Awshucks, after lamenting about how he wishes it wouldn't have come to this, why wouldn't we all just accept an apology for this? It was just a harmless prank, goes to Lee. Where are you going? Says the cop. I'm free to go, aren't I? Says Mr. Awshucks. Cop proceeds to book him for some kind of false witness charge, and he joins his two buddies for this night. Later that night, a bunch of mindless vandalism happens to the ex's house. Sometime in the wee hours of the morning, say after some late-night pizza people are done cleaning their store. From what I remember, it involved some kind of construction bridge paint being applied to the bricks and windows of their house. It's been a while, and I wish I could have seen the application. I just remember seeing the house for weeks, messed up with big block letters and paint on the windows. And it doesn't really end there. The university ended up revoking the ex-frat's right to have a house on campus. My 26 female, best friend, Nias, 28 female, oldest sister, Skylar, 30 female, has two kids with her husband, Cole, 30 male, Jay, 5 male, and Leah, 12 female. Naya and I have known each other for 12 years, since freshman year in high school, and are extremely close, but we are on completely different work schedules, with her working Monday, Friday, and me working Friday, Tuesday, because Naya has weekends off and I don't. We rarely ever get to hang out, but when we do, I always request PTO so we can, since Naya's job doesn't offer PTO and her paychecks are already immensely small as it is. At the end of April, Nia and I planned a sleepover at her house, so I requested my PTO a month in advance. It's only supposed to be 2 weeks' notice, but if I know sooner than 2 weeks, a heads up with extra time to spare is always nice. Now, for some extra context, Naya's house is not Skylar's and Cole's house, too. They have their own place but come to visit Naya frequently. Now, on to the main part of this story. Skylar and Cole were over for a visit at Naya's place when I arrived, and that night, we all decided to play Cards Against Humanity. When Skylar and Cole allowed Leah to play too, I thought Leah had already played this game and knew about all of the inappropriate answers and questions. Boy, was I wrong. Cole was the first one to draw a question card. I think the question was something like, why can't I sleep at night? Can't quite remember, but it wasn't an inappropriate question. When we all picked our answers, mine and Naya's answers were inappropriate. All I had were cards with inappropriate answers for clarification. When Cole read our answers, he told Naya and I, know your audience. Don't pick inappropriate cards. I explained to him that A, all I have are inappropriate answers, and B, it's an adult game. Cole actually told me to switch out my entire deck for a new one if every card I had is inappropriate. But I couldn't look at the cards I was drawing, so there was no avoiding getting more inappropriate cards. Not to mention, Leah is 12 years old. She's been in school for at least 6 years. I doubt she hasn't already heard about half the inappropriate stuff mentioned in the game, and it was Skylar's and Cole's choice to let her play. It really put a damper on the game, and after an hour, Naya and I were done. If you're going to allow your child to play an adult game, don't complain because it's too inappropriate for them. That's like taking your child to a strip club and then demanding that the strippers cover up because your child is there and it's inappropriate for you to be barely dressed around my child.